Good afternoon and welcome to Lunchtime Shares with Kevin, where we add value to people's lives, happening every day at 12 on ebizradio.com. For our lunchtime marketing segment, our very own resident genius, marketing and communications expert, Craig Page-Lee. How are you doing, Craig?
Hello, Kevin. I'm well, thanks. Yeah, enjoying this crisp, cool change in weather we're having.
Yeah, no, it seriously has arrived. I'm constantly putting on my winter socks and everything already. I'm not good with cold feet.
Oh, brilliant.
So, Craig, in the last two episodes of our weekly podcast series, covered the basics of brand building and the concept of brand architecture. Well, I have a great understanding of the steps and the principles one needs to adhere to the building of a brand. The concept of brand architecture is still somewhat a bit of an anomaly for me. So what tips do you have for our listeners out there as a reminder of what we discussed last week?
Yeah, Kevin, it's two concepts which really are incredibly interlinked, and for some, brand architecture is definitely an anomaly. But let me give you some tips, and hopefully we can simplify that. So we covered quite a lot on those two particular topics the past 2 weeks. But really, we must not forget the principles of brand authenticity and the gravitational pull when thinking about how to build a brand. And you'll recall we spoke at length about that. The listeners can definitely learn a lot more about this concept by reading up on Les Binet's methodology that theoretically enables us to understand the impact of gravitational pull or brand strength and its correlation to both the share of search and the share of market. And I was very happy to find that particular reading because it's an important emotive aspect to branding as well. But the tips that I want to share are very simple from our conversation last week, and looking at the broad definition of what a monolithic brand or branded house is. I want to jump straight into that particular topic first. So a monolithic or branded house maintains the focus of a single well-known and consistent brand, which in most instances is referred to as the master or parent brand. This is an effective option when products are in the same category or when they offer similar benefits across the category. And the multiple entities making up brands are often referred to as sub-brands, which often use the same name and identity of the so-called well-known or parent brand in this instance, Kevin. An example of this would be Apple or FedEx, single-minded, principal brand, all the divisions below, particularly in the likes of the FedEx for each of the categories that they offer the service in, wholly named FedEx with a service descriptor and the likes in there. And the advantages there is that it has very high brand equity. There's operational effectiveness in these kinds of brand structures, and there's absolutely no brand confusion. The cons, however, is there's a high dependence on that parent brand reputation. So in the likes of an Apple, if there's a flaw in a product or if there's a recall or something like that, the impact is that potentially across the entire spectrum of the products on offer there. Okay. Yeah. The next piece that we looked at was a house of brands. And a house of brands is exactly the opposite of a branded house, Kevin, where they're independent brands within a portfolio, and each has, in many instances, their own audience, their own marketing segmentation, and their own look and feel. And these brands, endorsed brands, are also known as, at least the house of brands is also known as endorsed brands, where the sub-brands independently named, but have some level of association or endorsement with their parent brand. And it's very simple examples here are Unilever or Procter & Gamble, where every single one of the products on the shelf, when you pick it up and you look at the label, a Unilever product or manufactured for by P&G, etc. So, very, very easy to understand that. The pros there that these are focused on individual market segments, as I mentioned, individual brand promises and reputation, so not necessarily at risk of the mother brand or parent brand reputational damage, and they definitely avoid much of that negative spillover. The cons, however, though, is there's weaker brand loyalty because each of those brands now really have to work hard and they're often commoditized. There's a lot more effort put into marketing of the brands, and often they're operationally ineffective. Sorry, you're going to say?
No, carry on.
Yeah, so the interesting thing around endorsed brands is the investment required around getting endorsed brands. Mother brand, at least single-minded focused investment. Endorsed brands, a bit more, because you've got to really leverage the mother brand plus the endorsed brand. But the sub-brand is really where the big expenses are coming through, because own operations, own marketing budget requirements, absolutely no association to the bigger picture in that regard. So a tough one there. The interesting one for me, and I'm seeing more and more brands playing into this space, Kevin, is the hybrid brand architecture. And as the name suggests, hybrid brand architect includes the range of strategies. In other words, it's a mix of the branded house on one end and house of brands on the other end, and it operates generally within one portfolio, and more often than not does include some kind of endorsement or strategic association with the parent brand. This particular brand structure is also, called the catch-all approach when the structure doesn't fit either of the two. And sometimes brands are forced into that particular statement, which isn't necessarily a well-considered decision either. However, often the brands of choice, it offers the brands of choice the greatest flexibility where the structure isn't clearly defined. And an example of this would be the likes of Coca-Cola. And very interesting example there, where Coca-Cola will have all the Coca-Cola branded products on one end, and within the Coca-Cola group of companies, you'll have the house of brands on the other side, where you'd have the Sprites and the Fantas and things like that. But the overarching ownership is at one level in the house of brands, but at the other side, it's a branded house with Coke, Coke Light, Coke Sugar Free, Coke Zero. So quite a nice interplay to see how the hybrid works in that regard.
Absolutely. So before we wrap up the section, I recall you mentioned something about the different levels of investment being required across the various brand architecture structure.
Yeah, so I started alluding to that now, Kevin. It is a good point, and thanks for remembering that, because, the straightforward answer is yes, there's a fundamentally different investment requirement across the various levels. So to put it simply, a branded house would require the least level of marketing investment, as in reality, you're only managing that single brand in the marketplace, and the advantages are concentrated marketing efforts that inevitably create real value and, with the net result, increase brand equity downstream. When looking at the house of brands, Kevin, one would naturally expect much higher levels of investment, because there are multiple brands to be managed, each requiring their own specific focus and a dedicated marketing activity. And in the bigger consumer manufacturers like the Unilevers and P&Gs, you'll find dedicated brand teams around those specific individual brands. So, not just an investment from in the marketplace territory, an investment from production back end, full established marketing teams, et cetera, et cetera. And in many instances, again, the creative agencies are actually different across the portfolio of brands there. So yeah, definitely much higher expected spend there. The investment, however, required to market a hybrid brand would probably be midway between the two. And again, the automatic reference that comes up there is Coca-Cola, where you've got the pure Coca-Cola branded products, the branded house, and the Coca-Cola house of brands, a product of Coca-Cola vis-a-vis the Fantas and the Sprites. And that really is the best example in that spectrum. So when looking at it, the singular approach can be taken when marketing Coca-Cola range of products versus the increased levels of management investing required to manage their respective brands within that particular aspect, with the Fantas and Sprites having their own budgets. And that the little chart that I've shared with you really demonstrates it quite well. So the branded house has the lowest level of investment required, whereas the house of brands is the highest level of investment required. But the inverse is at play there. So whilst necessarily lowest level investment, you've got the highest level of control in the brand, and where you've got the highest level investment, you don't necessarily have the highest level of control in place. So that the two definitely have an inverse relationship to each other there.
Fantastic. Craig, thank you. Guys, if you are tuning in, Craig and I chat about the in-depths on marketing and how to do it effectively, and some of the trends in the world. So if you are joining us, go and check it out every week on Thursday at around 12 o'clock. More to be found on each of these podcasts, and Craig sharing some amazing wisdom around marketing. So Craig, what are we going to be chatting about today?
Yeah, Kevin, last week I mentioned that I would look at a couple of major brands, and including some South African brands in this instance, that have rebranded over the last 5 years or so, and get to understand how they did it and potentially what it means for their business. So yeah, one that absolutely jumped out at me as the perfect brand to start off with, Kevin, is one that actually impacts our lives daily. It's impacting our life right now because we're busy streaming this particular show through Google. So yeah, I want to kick off by looking at Google's rebranding exercise. So a little bit of context again, and this is why I find it so fascinating, because Google was originally founded as a search engine company in 1998 under the name Google Inc. And as we all know, Google is the world's most popular search engine. How's this, with a 92% share of global search market, Kevin?
Wow.
Yeah. On the 2nd of October 2015, though, a holding company was created and branded as Alphabet Inc. Alphabet Inc. was then reordered, and the brand architecture was established to accommodate potential growth in other areas of the industry. And again, you know, any of these tech giants will inevitably end up diversifying into some other parallel businesses that support the place that they originally started. And in this instance, it was to diversify outside of internet search and online marketing. And, you know, those are specifically the areas we associate Google with. So in that establishment of a reordering by Alphabet Inc. and creating this brand architecture, we suddenly saw the brand that we thought was the ultimate brand actually being positioned as a brand of the largest subsidiary within the group. So whilst Google originated as the brand and the entity with the name, it actually took a step down to become a subsidiary within that larger group structure. And then, to quote Wikipedia, the establishment of Alphabet Inc. was prompted by a desire to make core Google business clear and more accountable, while allowing greater autonomy to group companies that operated in the business other than internet services. Founder Larry Page and Sergey Brin announced their resignation from the executive posts in December 2019, with the CEO role being filled by Sundar Pichai, also the CEO of Google. Page and Brin remain co-founders, employees, board members, and controlling shareholders of Alphabet Inc. And again, with the charts that I've shared, you can see how Google as a business actually had a series of service offerings. Come along, Alphabet Inc. moves one line down in the brand architecture value chain, and it sits quite nicely next to the other businesses that are not search related, the likes of Fiverr and Nest, etc. And then below that, Google then has its portfolio of products, which is important to understand, because do those now become a branded house or a house of brands in the next tier of branding architecture? And this is where it really got exciting again, because Google then decided to rebrand the look and feel of the service offering that sat below the Google suite. Yeah. And you know, there's always been a type-based identity with the various letters in color. And in this particular instance, you know, what we saw was that the Google apps would be rebranded as G Suite. And then following hot on the heels of the G Suite brand introduction, Google then launched their hardware products for G Suite, the Jamboard being the first, which is a 55-inch whiteboard connected to the cloud in 2016. Come 4 years later, October 2020, Google then undertook their biggest and potentially most contentious rebranding exercise when they branded the G Suite of productivity apps under the Google Workplace Suite. So we saw Google, we saw take a step down in the branding architecture, Alphabet Inc. in place. We saw this fairly interesting layer of independent brands sitting under the Google title at that particular point. And, you know, YouTube had absolutely no reference to anything that Google looked like, rolling it up into another suite of products and then seeing how that actually is consolidated to bring some brand consistency to bear there as well. So yeah, it's an interesting story to see where it's gone. But there's a lovely article that appeared on campaignasia.com, which was published on the 8th of December last year by Natasha Bach, and it addresses the way that the rebrand took place. So titled Google and Why the Controversial Workspace Rebrand Was Worth It, the article notes the following, Kevin. Google was criticized when it rebranded G Suite to Workplace this fall, obviously during 2020. But the redesign marked a strategic move for Google and a bet that remote working is here to stay. So when Google rebranded the G Suite of productivity apps in October last year under the Google Workspace Suite, the criticism was real. Like with many tech rebrands, Airbnb, Slack, and Facebook, some users found the changes to be confusing, and in Google's case, they felt the new workspace logos lacked continuity and were very different to tell apart on the crowded browser tabs. And I don't know what your thoughts were when you experienced this particular rebrand initially.
I did find the Google moving to Google Workspace was quite annoying because there wasn't any clear-cut, defined reason from going from a G Suite, from having Google G Suite to moving to Workspace. So I really had no idea why they were doing it or what was different. I just knew it was happening.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, on why
very, very good point. The communication wasn't as effective as I believe it could have been, and I didn't see it either. Just it's one of those things that it was going to happen and it happened. Well, yeah. But Kevin, the primary reason for that rebrand was actually a strategic one, and it demonstrated the unification of the products into a more cohesive offering. With Google Workspace VP Kellingwada, who joined in April 2020, positioning to oversee the rebrand, stating the following. So as remote work becomes the norm, tech giants, including Facebook and Microsoft, are capitalizing on the shift. Google has all of the tools to compete in the remote work arena, but needs to pull together a more cohesive offering and tell a more consistent story. So it all makes sense, but we obviously weren't informed of it and didn't really get to understand at that particular point.
Yeah.
As with anything at Google, the redesign was created with vigorous user testing and feedback. Google found that as people spend more time working remotely, they were overwhelmed by G Suite, which operated as a bunch of point solutions rather than a cohesive offering. I suppose that is a relevant statement. So for examples, users had to move out of Gmail to start a video chat or navigate to Drive to start a new doc or a sheet. And again, these are valid points, so one can't question the relevance as to why they were doing it. The question, however, became, how can we better solve the needs of our users by bringing these solutions much closer together? So yeah, it did have logic, no doubt about that. So the design rationale, Kevin's defined as follows. The design was meant to visually convey the strategy, and each logo that Google used, at least Google still used its four flagship colors of green, yellow, blue, and red to portray the consistency while squarely positioning the apps under the Google brand. And behind the logos, Google made an integrating workspace products work more closely. So it understood the power of the colors it had. It understood that it needed to bring services and product suite opportunities together. So it took a really bold statement to create the set of new icons, which I still at times don't get my head around, but nevertheless, that's just me. So yeah, in June, Google thought that'd make it easier to navigate to meet through the Gmail interface. Going forward, it plans to integrate the workspace even further, Kevin. For example, allowing users to launch a video chat in Meet directly while collaborating on a doc. And that's phenomenal. That really is, as a proposition and staying in an environment. It's like buying and paying in WhatsApp, taking MCOM into a WhatsApp platform in a single environment, doing multi-user interface experiences without having to leave the environment. Obviously, Google is designed their future around that. So, fantastic.
Yeah.
Kelly Walder again states that Google's measuring the success of the rebrand over time, running awareness studies, and hopefully seeing that flow through to revenue. And despite the intermediate backlash, which Google did expect would happen, the redesign has apparently been well worth it because it tells the story of Google's strategy visually, both to consumers and employees.
Yeah, I mean, Craig, I 100%, my entire business is on Google Workspace. So, I mean, I see the value in it, and it is very useful and connective and does stuff. But I still find there are little things that you could usually do on Word, or you could usually do on an email that you can't do on, for example, Google Keeps. You know, keeping your notes and stuff. They limit you on how you can actually formulate information in Google Keep. So I think as much as I get the rebranding point, some of the stuff that they have is still like, huh? You know, it's like, why isn't this as usable and user friendly as you know, the Word document, for example? But I mean, I thank you for sharing the actual the brand, the actual images, sorry, of the new brand architecture structure of Google Workspace. You mentioned that you're going to cover South African brands that have undertaken a rebranding exercise recently. What can you share with us with that in regards to that?
Yeah, Kevin, if only I was able to focus on one major and fairly recent rebranding story by a South African brand, what do you think it would be?
Sure. Fairly recent. No, I can't think of anything fairly recent.
Okay, well, it's that of Absa Bank.
Okay, yeah.
Which, you know, it is a significant and most definitely the most recent of any significant rebranding in South Africa. So yeah, let me quickly start with a brief history of Absa, and there were some interesting things that I learned in reviewing this as well. So Absa's had an interesting journey, Kevin. Forming in 1991 as the Amalgamated Banks of South Africa, the acronym created out of that Absa, through the merger of UBS Holdings, Allied, and Volkskas Groups. And you may well remember that goes back some time, and some interest within the Sage Group. And in May 2005, Barclays Bank of the United Kingdom purchased the majority stake in Absa. So we had mid-90s Rebrand. Come the mid-first decade of the 2000s, another big moment in their history with Barclays Bank taking the majority stake, which saw a real brand traction move there as well. So Absa then took on a strong endorse strategy and was rebranded as Absa, a member of Barclays. The brand did come across as a bit schizophrenic at times, and an example of this is where Absa Group was positioned as serving the Kenyan market as Barclays, when actually in South Africa it was Absa, a member of Barclays, whereas in some of the other African countries they hadn't yet got to the switch around. So people were wondering, you know, what role Barclays actually had to play, and if there was something sinister happening where Absa was going to be usurped and actually the Barclays brand was going to be the future brand, if Africa was the example to look at there. However, in early 2016, Barclays banks across the continent were also rebranded with the endorse strategy. So that was short-lived. But talk about short-lived. Within a few months of 2016, Kevin, literally the 1st of March, Barclays PLC, which was the controlling shareholders of Barclays Africa, announced that they wanted to focus their business on the US and the UK. And actually, they noted that they wanted to sell their controlling stakes in all the banks across the 7 different African countries. And those at that stage were Botswana, Ghana, Kenya, Mauritius, Seychelles, Tanzania, and Zambia. And they set a timeline of 2 to 3 years to exit the continent, with the banks eventually all being reintegrated and wholly owned by Absa and taking on the Absa brand again at that particular point.
So why did Barclays initially rebrand to Absa on the continent when, by the sounds of it, they knew exactly that they were going to exit the continent?
Yeah, okay. Kevin, loaded question, and I think a very relevant question, because if one looks at the effort and financial investment required in rebranding, and I will touch on that later on, you would think that in the strategy, the short-termism is understood, that you wouldn't be making these kinds of investments to, you know, make a decision, lock it all in, and then very quickly, you know, unbundle it. But yeah, it's something I don't think we'll ever get to understand the full truth about. and why that happened, only for it to unravel in the short time. I do, however, believe that the destable political situation across the continent definitely had a role to play in that decision, Kevin. 2016, there were national elections in a couple of the countries on the continent, South Africa being one of those as well, if I'm not mistaken. And yeah, I just think that maybe the unknown future of the continent was something that Barclays was wary of, and didn't see that its investment was going to yield what it expected at that point, nevertheless. That said, the initial intent was for Barclays Group to build on the equity of Absa, as you would expect for any merger and acquisition at that particular point, because Absa actually was a strong and stable brand. And to quote Maria Ramos, a CEO of the bank at that time, "We would like to build a brand as a bank that Africa's people can be proud of, a truly independent African bank with global stability." So, going back to the early 2000s, yeah, that was the vision, building the best bank for the continent, and obviously leveraging the investment opportunity from Barclays to achieve that. Yeah, but things moved on, and come along 2018, we saw something really different happen. So to that extent, I came across a really great article that served as a good reference when interrogating the thinking behind the Absa rebrand. Posted on the 11th of July 2018 by Michael Bratton of the Media Online, and titled "Behind the Brand, Absa Repositions as Brave, Passionate and Ready," the article addresses the following. So from where we were losing Barclays, pulling back to Absa, Absa then revealed a new brand logo, a new vision, and a new look and feel on the 29th of July 2018. So 13 years after that Barclays intervention, a brand new bank per se revealing itself there. Bobby Malabi, who was is the group executive of brand and corporate relations at Absa, noted at the launch that a lot of thought went into what we want to do going forward. We had to deal with the divorce between us and Barclays Africa. For us as a business, for the first time in 15 years or so, we can chart our own story. And I think that's an incredibly important part of this whole thinking around leading to creating the most effective, best bank in Africa, where it has now rid itself of any particular other co-ownership aspects, and they can stand and create their truth and define the story that will chart their future. So what I appreciate about their process is it was quite inclusive nature. And for 2.5 years, Absa revisited all aspects of their business, Kevin. They took the decision to consult over 130,000 employees, clients, customers, consumers, and stakeholders in a process that asked them to share their ideas and views on the company, rather than just having a set of executives deciding on the direction of the strategy and potentially what this thing's going to look like in the future. Another key decision they made was for the brand was making the brand integral to the business and making sure that the brand's work informed part of the strategy, the structure, and how people felt about their business, and something that we've spoken about on a number of occasions, Kevin. And that is core. The brand is core to the business, and not just getting really good insights from the stakeholders and staff and customers, etc., to help you identify what this thing must say and do and all the rest of it. They put that brand at the heart of defining the future of the business. And that's really, really great. The biggest task entailed eliminating all mention of and branding relating to Barclays Africa across the business. And that had a hard lock deadline of 5th of June 2018 in South Africa and 5th of June 2020 on the continent. So they set themselves quite a stringent hard-coded delivery to get rid of any reference to Barclays across the continent, which I think was a job well done. Obviously, the reason for the longer timeline given to eliminating the Barclays brand from the rest of the continent is that the Barclays name was well entrenched in those regions, and obviously it took a lot longer to literally physically extract it as well, because the signage had to come off, the collateral had to be eliminated, the retail stores had to be redesigned. So an entirely single-minded focused activity, which was really good for re-establishing a single-minded new brand at the end of the day, but a rather lengthy and costly process as well.
Yeah, Craig, as you're mentioning all the consideration that goes into this, I'm just thinking the last 10 years, while all of this was happening, along came Beat Bank from F&B with Steve along, and they had such huge impact around what they were doing from a banking perspective. So, I mean, if you look at what Absa was doing here and the considerations that they needed to take, so not only did they have to, rebrand and make sure that there's a continuity throughout the brand, they also had some severe competition with F&B and the Steve campaign, because that it really took F&B to a whole nother level with their banking app, etc., etc.
That's a great point.
Imagine, if you did a sort of a study on this to see, or to have, two of the marketing managers in the same room, kind of going, so how did you consider this, and how did you play that ball? But I mean, the most expensive exercise here, because rebranding all of this can surely be a couple of, I think it's billions you mentioned, right?
Yes, they're billions. I'll take you through that now. But it's a really good point that you make, because Barclays, Absa had potentially 3 instances for disrupting their thinking and message to the market, and F&B developed, a decade or so ago, F&B developed an incredible campaign that had nice longevity and really delivered incredibly well. And during that process, Absa and Barclays were having their little tete-a-tete and getting ready to unbundle themselves. And you're quite right. So there was a lot of work to look internally to try and understand what the bank needed to do to move forward, and what that was interpreted for the external audience, whereas F&B was well entrenched, the leading bank, and they had a great campaign that just sort of shot them forward into a trajectory that none of the other banks could keep up with at that particular time as well. So what will be interesting to see now is that coming in 2 years into this, a year for the African continent, ex-South Africa, and nearly 2 years for South Africa, is to see where the brand is, what the salience of the brand is now, where they pegged against the other brands again. And I think when we look at the Brand Z rankings, it will probably come up later in the year again, and the next gen's most loved brand announcements, and that'll be really interesting to see where the new Absa sits in respect of that particular example you cited. But on top of that, Kevin, obviously Capitec came along and took a big sliver out of potentially an area of Absa's client base, whilst they were grappling with who they were, mass exit into the likes of Capitec, and then the emergence of our tech-first time digital bank. What have they done to the market? So an interesting category for us to maybe do a deep dive into in one of the shows is just to see, over the evolution of these particular brands in the country, of the top 4-5 banks, where have the disruptors come along, and what have they done, and how have rebrand exercises like this kept Absa either ahead of the game, or is it helping them get ahead of the game again? Really great point you make. So as you mentioned, was it an expensive process? Absolutely, Kevin. The rebranding exercise cost Absa probably close to 12 billion rand, and that obviously was to take care of all the changes required in disassociating with Barclays Africa, and much of that was allocated to logistics, physical rollout of the brand, pulling down signage, reinstating collateral, uniforms, etc., as I mentioned. But David Wingfield, Group Marketing Head of Absa, noted that we have corralled all of our marketing resources behind this for the next few years. So we're using current spend plus money we got from Barclays Africa, their initial investment. So focusing on this and taking the new Absa to market and to our people. So yes, it's a big number, but obviously if provisions were made and there was a bit of foresight and forecast to understand when it was going to happen, and using some of the initial Barclays investment, I think maybe it was well worth the investment.
Yeah.
It's also important to note that an assessment was done on where the bank brand was starting from, and with the end decision being to retain the Absa brand rather than launch a new brand. So obviously you go into these things with the possibility that you might have to launch a new brand, but the risks associated with that are so huge. Fortunately, there wasn't that amount of negativity in the divorce. So the Absa brand probably still stood for something, and the research definitely identified that. So it revealed that customer recognition of the Absa name and its associated qualities was quite high across the continent, not just in South Africa where there was more prominence of the brand, but actually across the continent, Kevin.
Yeah.
Going back to Michael Bratton's article, and just a reminder, it was titled "Behind the Brand, Absa Repositions as Brave, Passionate and Ready." We learn about the 7 strategic imperatives that guided everything that Absa does, and it's really nice to be able to unpack these and understand what they mean for the business, and use them in our thinking when moving forward to actually judge the business to see if it is delivering against this. So these are defined as: be bold, be a brand with heart, be a brand with purpose, put people back at the center of everything we do, both employees and customers, provide accountability and autonomy, be agile, the strength of stuff that we have. Then that's really great. And I'm always encouraged to see that Absa are putting people back at the center of the organization, and the reference that they're mentioning that every important concept of purpose. For me, that's really important, because on the topic of purpose, we learned that Absa's brand purpose was defined as brave, passionate and ready. And these are all incredibly actionable terms, which hopefully will be lived and demonstrated every day across the entire organization. And when you read brand, passionate and ready, you can see how it fits into the be bold, be a brave with heart, be a brand with purpose, the 7 strategic imperatives and the purpose definition really tying in very, very nicely as well. But again, what was quite nice in this article is there 4 further priorities that really talk about where the brand can go. So they wanted to add stretch and meaning with the brand as their first priority. The second priority was to address the legacy issues of the brand as Absa. It is an acronym that we all understood as the Amalgamated Banks of South Africa. And as you know, some of that did have some negative connotation as a bit of an apartheid, old era bank, okay? And that had to change through the rebranding process. And they wanted to ensure that Absa didn't stand for any of that, but that it really stood for something that was moving into the future. And one of the ways that was achieved is they actually revisited the entire makeup of the logo and icon, and they went for a lowercase lettering solution there. The third priority was to review the color red. As you know, Absa's been red forever, and did they lose that? What would that mean? Should they lose it? Was there negativity associated with the red? Unfortunately, David Wingfield again noted that the problem with Absa is that everyone knows it is red, but no one knows what it means anymore, as we haven't given it meaning. So the opportunity there was that they actually had an asset that they could leverage, but they could build layers of meaning into it, and they didn't have to get rid of it and find something new and put the effort into trying to establish something new. So again, I believe a good approach to keep something that was in place, and that with a bit of a dial-up really could have made a fundamental difference. And then lastly, the fourth imperative there is, and probably the most important priority for me, is that it talks to the modern world, and it wanted to see how the brand fits into the digital world. And what they did there is they created a logo that fits into the app logo space as a key reference to say, actually, this is where we're at, this is where we need to go, and we've managed to bring our logo straight into a digital world, into a little app icon space, and it means something, and really looking at all facets of the brand engagement in that particular instance as well, Kevin.
So great, thanks for sharing the insights. It's really interesting to hear all of the considerations. There is one word that I really need to understand out of this whole rebranding process, is the Africanacity. Um, but because I've got two questions about it. It's like, is it a good idea to create a word? And is Africanacity even a real word?
Yeah, I love it. I love it. It's a great question, and definitely, Kevin, it's a question many people have asked. You see the questions in social media as well. So firstly, no, Africanacity is not an official word that I could find in any dictionary that I reference. But I have to admit that I really do like the word because I believe it represents many layers of richness, relevance, and energy, and yeah, I think it should actually go into the dictionary. I think there's a lot of effort being made in trying to deliver what it means through video and visual sense on the website and through various forums and that. And I think it's resonating well with consumers. And there's going to be a moment where yeah, I don't question it anymore. I see the Africanacity campaigns. I'm not an Absa banker by any means. But I resonate with it. It's working for me. So I think it could have failed horrifically, but I really think it's working. So the website explains the word very succinctly, Kevin, and it reveals the following: we bring possibilities to life. We as Africans are remarkable people that always find solutions and a way to get things done. Absa calls this unique tenacity Africanacity. It's the way we get things done. As a business, we are committed to doing whatever it takes to make sure our customers around the African continent have the best service and products available. We're all about finding ways to bring your possibilities to life.
You see, I completely get it, and I love the fact that it's tenacity and Africa. But I would have liked an advert just to like someone explain it in a fun kind of like, yeah, like tenacity, but the African way. Like,
yeah, look, you know what, again, a very good point, because I now actually asked the question, was there an internal video that was created to land the idea with staff?
Yeah,
if we're really grappling around this concept, how easily was it taken on, understood, and recognized internally? And if there was a really great campaign that was delivered to bed this concept down internally, well, then why wasn't that articulated for an external audience as well? A really good question there. There is, however, a video on the site that demonstrates Africanacity in action, and the website notes the following around it. This film is a celebration of tenacity and ingenuity. It is a demonstration of our uniquely African way to solve problems. It's about the way we get things done. It's Africanacity in action. So it sets 3 lines of context up for when you view the video. If it didn't have that definition, I can tell you right now, when you see it for the first time, you're going to wonder what on earth is going on in the campaign, because you read the context, you see the video, you connect the pieces. But absolutely, I agree with your question, why there wasn't an explainer. Interesting. Yeah, we should ask David and the marketing team around that.
It makes for a beautiful radio ad and a beautiful YouTube video.
Yeah, Kevin, you know what? I'm going to scratch around a little bit more and see if I can find anything on that. But definitely the fact that they had to have a context to the video and give some kinds of definitions and things like that. Yeah, maybe does beg a question as to why they didn't do that more overtly. David Wingfield went on further to explain that Africanacity is the idea of how we pitch up and how the people around us pitch up and how we do things. And it's quite nice to see some of that in action in the video as well. So the new term tied in perfectly with Absa's new brand positioning, Kevin, which was bringing your possibilities to life. So, how you pitch up, how you do things, how people around you pitch up is all part of that bringing your possibilities to life. What was really great is the launch campaign was produced by FCB Joburg, and it's definitely worth visiting the agency's website to gain deeper understanding of all the campaign elements, Kevin, and learn about the success achieved across some of the social media and digital platforms there. Really, I thoroughly enjoyed going through that content. However, we still have to be cognizant of the fact that this entire exercise means nothing if it's not backed up by evidence of everyone living that Africanacity, everyone living those new values daily and delivering the quality, efficient customer service that they strive for. I've not heard anything overtly negative or contrary to that since the rebrand. So hopefully the exercise has proven successful, and you know, maybe we'll see Absa starting to run up the ranks again, Kevin. Yeah. So just in closing, yeah, I really want to ask you a question here, Kevin. Do you know who designed the most recent Absa logo, the circular version with the lowercase modern typeface?
No, I don't.
Okay, nor did I. So I had to go and scratch around on that one. So I didn't know either, but searching on the web revealed the following. The bespoke new Absa font has been created by the globally renowned logo font specialist Miles Newlin, who is based in London. The circle is dynamic and frames the lowercase Absa. While put to use as warm, embracing frame for the new logo type, the circle is steeped in symbolism. Just as the Pick and Pay rebranded many years ago, the logo was developed by an international agency.
Wow. So, Craig, as we get close to wrapping up the show today, are there any other great rebrand stories that are that the listeners out there could find information on in South Africa?
Yeah, Kevin, definitely. There are a few other South African rebrand stories, and you know, good search on the web will reveal some amazing content. But two of the most notable from the past year, outside of the likes of Absa, would be that of Game and Pep, both legendary South African brands. Game partnered with The Odd Number, a really good local agency, for their strategic repositioning and rebrand, and Pep partnered with Super Union Africa, a division of Ogilvy South Africa, to drive their brand relaunch from mid-2020. So the Game refresh addressed the positioning that the culture of the brand is to help customers save money so that they can live better lives. The updated positioning is more contemporary unpacking of this, but it keeps Game's favorite bold pink color, introduced when the first store opened in Durban in 1970, keeps it in pride of place. And, you know, I was a young kid, grew up in Durban, so was definitely aware of Game every single day of my life, growing up and living in KZN.
Yeah.
Kevin, the Game rebranding process entailed the following, I should say, sorry. The new strategy across the business with a new positioning and a new payoff line, You've Got Game, was revealed. A new identity and visual style was rolled out. Revisions of the full suite of internal and external branded collateral and digital social touchpoints were addressed, and applications of internal elements across new store signage for all store formats as well. Then moving on to the Pep brand refresh, which will be rolled out systematically across 2,350 odd stores over the next few years. Sure. The clothing retailer was launched in 1965 in DR, Kevin, something I didn't know. DR obviously being in the North Cape province.
Yeah.
The brand alludes to the fact that it is the biggest single brand retailer in Africa. How's that for you?
That's amazing.
Yeah, Kevin, thank you. I think that when we stop learning from these sessions, definitely when we call it a day or we try an entirely different approach to the format. The intent is that get some of the learnings out there and make us relevant in what we're delivering.
So from today's session, so what are the key points and tips that you can share with the listeners out there? Okay,
Kevin, couple of really simple points, and referencing the Ultimate Guide to Rebranding Your Company in 2021, which was published to gemnote.com blog on the 13th of May 2020, the article addresses some key points when considering a rebranding process. So point one, list out the reasons. So before planning for a rebranding strategy, you have to ask yourself, what is the reasons that you're doing a rebrand? Define the problems or some of the issues that you're facing at the moment and assess if it could be the case for rebranding and if rebranding could actually solve those issues. Look for a branding team, do some market research. For example, establish if your products are still relevant in the current market. Evaluate your client. It's always important to analyze the current clients and define what your ideal client is, because sometimes you actually got to get rid of clients. Evaluate your competition. Assessing your competition, you can see some of the trends and brands that are popular in your industry, and it will also help you understand where you need to stay relevant in your particular niche. Evaluate your company's mission and vision. We've picked up on this quite a bit. It definitely needs to reflect in your rebranding, Kevin. Do a brand audit. You must look at every single aspect of your brand across the entire industry and really get to understand what are the other trends in the industry. Brainstorm creative ways to renew your brand. You must consider that your brand should be relevant to the current market niche. So yeah, bring some focus groups in with potential clients or even some competition where you can, and just really get to understand their point of view on your brand. Revamp your branding. It's the execution side of the brand. You've got to get out there and implement your brand in a fresh, emotive, and engaging way with your team. Update your brand guidelines, incredibly important. After your brand is complete, you should always update the brand guidelines because they really are the guiding principles of the brand, very much internally with employees and externally to get that brand consistency so everybody is aware of what your brand stands for and what it represents in terms of the company as a whole. Update your customers on your new branding. Well, we actually spoke about this. What did Google do in respect of the G Suite and the workplace? We didn't really get to know about it. Redesign your image on the internet, most important, and then roll it out. Do some post-rebranding tasks. Rebranding process does not end in the publication. You have to assess if your rebranding strategy works by analyzing data from your new branding. It may take a long time to fully assess if your rebranding strategy works. You can track keywords, website URLs, social media engagement, sales, and many more to completion. And that's an important point. You don't just let it go into the market and sit back and wait. And I'm sure that, every day the Absa team are really evaluating across these various components that we've mentioned as to where their brand's at, what's it doing, is it delivering against all of the promises, are people arriving to live, feel, and do the Africanacity?
Absolutely. Thank you, Craig. Absolutely fascinating, as always. And guys, if you want to check it out, it happens every Thursday on ebusradio.com. Check it out at 12 o'clock. If you go you can also find us on iTunes, and I think it's called Switch or Stitch. I think it's Stitch. And yeah, podcast all over. And please go and check it out. And if you want to follow all that Craig's been sharing with us, it makes a whole bunch of impact on your brand and your marketing. Thank you so much and yeah, I will see you next week.
Thank you, Kevin. Look forward to it. Have a great rest of week.
And you. Chat later.
Bye.